Text of Zhang Ailing's Half-Life Chapter 16. Things in the world are often unexpected. Shijin's sister-in-law used to be so enthusiastic about bringing Shijin and Cuizhi together. But after Cuizhi moved in, there was no harmony between the sisters. Cuizhi still has the temper of a child, and the eldest mistress is caring and caring. Although they are full cousins, perhaps because they are too close, they are prone to friction. First of all, it's because Shijin's mother is too partial. As the saying goes, a new toilet hoop will be fragrant in 3 days, so newcomers will naturally be favored more. Moreover, Mrs. Shen loves her son very much. Of course, she is partial to Shijin. Although the dispute has nothing to do with Shijin. Gradually, the opinions between the families became deep. Cuizhi told Shijin that it would be better to separate the families as soon as possible, so as not to keep bullying their orphans and widows. The idea of dividing the family had been brewing for a period of time and was finally implemented. The leather goods store was also taken down. The eldest young lady took Xiao Jian to live by herself, and Shijin found a job in Shanghai, working in the engineering department of a foreign company. Mrs. Shen and Cuizhi followed Shijin to Shanghai. After all, Mrs. Shen couldn't get used to living in Shanghai, and without a young lady and a common enemy, Mrs. Shen and Cuizhi gradually started to get at odds with each other. Mrs. Shen always felt that Cuizhi was not considerate enough towards Shijin. She even felt that she bullied him in every way, and resented Shijin for giving in to her. Mrs. Shen couldn't help but get in between the couple sometimes and get angry with Cuizhi. Mrs. Shen, who is as old as Mrs. Shen, still behaves like an ordinary woman. She will always go back to her parents' house in anger and stay with her brother for 2 days. Shijin always has to go and pick her up personally. She had always wanted to go back to Nanjing, but she was afraid that the eldest mistress would laugh at her for helping the second bedroom. As a result, they went to start a small family of their own, but she was squeezed out. Mrs. Shen finally returned to Nanjing and rented a house with her 2 old servants. Shijin often goes back to see her. Later, Cuizhi had a child, and she went back once with her. It was a boy, and Mrs. Shen was very happy. She finally reconciled with Cuizhi. Went back shortly thereafter. Some women become more beautiful after giving birth to their first child. This is the case with Cuizhi, who is even slimmer despite being plump. She gave birth to a total of 2 children, a boy and a girl. The world has changed over the years, but her state of mind has always been very calm. In the life of a young lady, there is nothing more thrilling than eating a worm and a fruit. It was already after the war. Shu Hui returned to China. Shijin went to pick up the plane, and Cuizhi also went with him. Seeing that Shu Hui's family hasn't arrived yet, the airport has always been deserted. More like a department store that was out of stock during the war, with empty counters and bare plastic floors. Suddenly the loudspeaker buzzed with a report, and it was clear that the young and beautiful female staff member was holding the phone, but the voice was definitely not connected to her. It was unknown which corner it came from. With a hint of terror, the two were wandering around the place, and Shi Junyan said, Shu Hui must have gotten married all these years he has been there. Cuizhi didn't say anything at first, but after a while she said, if he got married, what did he write in his letter? Don't mention it? Shijin said with a smile. He always likes to make fun, maybe he wants to surprise us. Cuizhi turned away and said angrily, what are you guessing? He will be here soon. You'll know. Shijin was so happy today that he didn't notice her impatient expression at all. He still said with a smile, if he's not married yet, let's be a matchmaker for him. Cuizhi, when she heard this, she was really angry, but she could only hold back her anger and sneer. For someone as old as Shu Hui, if he wants to get married, he won't go find it himself. And you still have to worry about him? After a moment of silence, Cuizhi spoke again, and her voice became much gentler. She said, I'm going to treat Shu Hui well tomorrow. We can borrow the Yuan family's cook to cook a table of dishes. Shijin said with a smile. Hey, that big secretary is so generous. Shu Hui is not an outsider. Why is he so ostentatious? Cuizhi said, I'm also your good friend. I haven't seen him for so many years. Is it possible that he can't bear to part with this money? Flowers. Shijin said, "That's not what you're saying. Instead of having a big treat at home, it's better to go out to eat with him. There are fewer people and it's easier to talk." Cuizhi's anger that she had just suppressed surged up again, and she said loudly, "Okay, I don't care anymore. You can invite me as much as you want. Don't be so blushing, okay?" Shijin wasn't blushing at first, but when she said this, he turned red with anger and said, "You are blushing and you are talking about me." Cuizhi was about to reply when Shijin saw Mrs. Zhu coming from a distance. Cuizhi saw him saying hello and guessed it was Shu Hui's mother. The two of them agreed in unison. They all put away their angry expressions and stepped forward with cheerful faces. Yufeng went to Qingqing during the anti-Japanese war and has not yet returned from demobilization. Mrs. Zhu didn't go with her and went back to her hometown to live. This time she hurried to Shanghai to wait for Shu Hui and stay at her daughter's house temporarily. Shijin was going to pick her up and take her to the airport together. But because her son-in-law and his whole family were going, she asked Shijin to go first. When introduced one by one, her daughter was already a young woman in her 20s, and she didn't even recognize her. After standing there and chatting for a few words, Shijin smiled and said, "Shu Hui's letter. Did you mention it? Is he married?" Mrs. Zhu laughed softly and said, "Married and divorced, right? It was still 2 years ago. He didn't say much in his letter." Everyone couldn't help but be silent for a while, and his brother-in-law said, "The United States is not like this now." Shijin also casually asked softly, "Is it an American?" Mrs. Su Shijin smiled quietly and said, "Chinese." Shijin thought to himself that there were very few Chinese couples getting divorced in foreign countries. But the news had been cut off in recent years, or the situation was different. Maybe it was an Americanized overseas Chinese lady. He didn't ask, but Mrs. Su seemed to have anticipated his question and added with a smile, "He is also an overseas student." Their in-law's wife then said, "She is Ji Hangsen's daughter." Shijin didn't know who was this Ji Hangsen, but judging by his tone, he must be not only a celebrity but also a wealthy man. There was another moment of silence. Shi Junyan laughed and said, "I can't believe that he has been gone for 10 years. Mrs. Su said, "No, who would have thought that he would not be able to come back in time for the war?" His sister smiled and said, "It's so easy to look forward to his coming back, Dad. I can't come back yet. I'm so anxious." Shijin asked, "Have you heard from me recently?" Mrs. Su said, "I'm still waiting for the boat. It would be great if I can come back in time for the new year. Let's talk. Time flies. This flight has arrived on time." Everyone squeezed out to wait, and through a row of barbed wire fences, they saw Shu Hui walking through the crowd carrying a small piece of luggage and holding a raincoat. The airport is like this. It is the junction of time and space, but it is so ordinary. It is so ordinary that it makes people disappointed. It makes people laugh with disappointment on the one hand. It also makes people laugh with joy. Shu Hui is still so beautiful, but she has always had a different look as a mother. Mrs. Su smiled at her daughter and said, "Shu Hui has lost weight." "Do you think he has lost weight?" "He is much thinner." After a while, everyone was surrounding him. Shu Hui and Shijin held hands tightly, and of course Cuizhi did the same. He still followed Chinese rules when it came to his family members, and he had never met his brother-in-law. Cuizhi was particularly taciturn today, but this was only natural. She and Mrs. Su met for the first time, and they were caught in the scene of family reunion. His sister asked, "Have you eaten?" Shu Hui said, "You have eaten on the plane." Shijin helped carry the luggage and said, "Go to our place first." Mrs. Su said, "Now I am looking for a house in Shanghai. It's difficult. I think it's better to wait until you come. I want to book a hotel for you. Shijin will definitely want you to stay at their place." Their in-law's wife said, "It's better to stay at our place for 2 days. It's rare and lively. It's lively." Shijin said, "Are you on Bike Road? It's not far from our place. It's convenient for him to go back to see his aunt." Cuizhi also said, "It's better to stay at our place." After repeating this, Shu Hui also just promised. We called 2 cars and returned home with full loads. We went to Bike Road first. Their in-law's wife originally wanted everyone to sit in and take over for him at Feng's tower in the evening. Zhen and Cuizhi happened to have a social event today, so they didn't get out of the car. They expected that mother and son would have a lot to talk about when they reunited after a long separation, and they agreed that he would stay here for one night and move here tomorrow. Cuizhi smiled at Shu Hui and said, "Then let's go back first." "You must come." They returned to their own house. Their house was not big and there was a lawn in front of the door. This was because Cuizhi liked to raise dogs and needed some space to walk the dogs, and the children could also play in the garden. There were 2 children. The older one was originally called Bai Bai, but later he had a younger sister, so he was called Dabai, and the younger one was called Bai. They are all back from school now. Bai was eating bread in the living room, eating crumbs all over the floor and attracting many ants. She squatted on the ground and watched. When Zhen came, she shouted, "Dad, Daddy, come and see the ants. They're scheduling work." Zhen squatted down and smiled and said, "What are the ants doing?" Bai said, "The ants are scheduling work. Ban takes the household registration rice." Zhen said with a smile, "Oh, how about the household registration rice?" Cuizhi came over and said to Bai, "Look, it's so dirty to eat bread without eating it on the table and squatting on the ground, Bai." She shouted with a smile, "Mom, come and see how to roll rice." Cuizhi said to Zhen, "That's how you are. You don't care about her, but you still lead her to do nonsense." Zhen said with a smile, "I think what she said is quite good. It's interesting." Cuizhi said, "You flatter her anyway and call me a villain. So both children like you or not. Look at what's going on here. The ants are used to coming and they're coming again. What will it look like when people come tomorrow? I don't even have time to clean it up here." She had originally made room to keep Shu Hui in the study, but the servants were still waxing. The house was noisy, and a dog became very excited, darting in and out behind people. The newly waxed floor made people trip and almost fall several times. Cuizhi then remembered and said to Zhen, "This dog may bite when it sees a stranger. Remember to tie it up in the pavilion tomorrow." Cuizhi has always refused to admit that her dog can bite. Last year, Zhen's nephew Xiaojian came to Shanghai to take the college entrance examination and stayed at their house. He was bitten by a dog. Cuizhi blamed Xiaojian for being bad, saying that he was too timid. If he didn't run away, the dog would never do it. "We'll bite him." This time she made an exception and tied up the dog, which made the whole family feel strange. Bai and the dog followed Zhen upstairs and walked through the pavilion. Zhen saw that some of the books and other items in his study had been moved here and piled up in a mess on the floor. He let out a cry and said, "How can I do this? Are all my books piled on the ground?" Just as he was saying this, the dog had already chewed the books on the ground, chewing up all the engineering magazines he had subscribed to over the years. Zhen shouted hurriedly, "Hey, no biting." Bai also yelled, "No biting." She picked up a book and hit the dog, but missed and the book rolled far away. She picked up a big book with both hands, but before she could throw it out, Zhen snatched it away and said, "Look at you, kid." Bai started crying. She was also being naughty because she heard her mother coming upstairs. The children have always known that Cuizhi has this temper. She usually blames Zhen for spoiling the children, but if he really disciplines them, she will stand in the way and protect the children. At this time, Cuizhi walked into the pavilion and saw Bai crying and snatching a book from Zhen. She frowned and said to Zhen, "Look, you are as knowledgeable as a child." She took a book. Just let her play with it. And it made her cry. When the second girl heard this, she burst into tears even more. Zhen was just busy moving magazines to the box aside. Cuizhi frowned and said, "I've forgotten what I came here to do." "Oh, I remembered. Go out and buy a bottle of better wine. Buy a bottle of Johnny Hugger's whiskey. I want it black brand." Zhen said, "Shu Hui doesn't necessarily care about drinking foreign wine. Don't we still have to bottles of pretty good green plum wine? Let him change his taste." Cuizhi said, "He doesn't like to drink Chinese wine." "Wine," Zhen said with a smile. "How can that be the case? I've known him for so many years and I still don't know. He thought it was ridiculous, but he wanted her to tell him what Shu Hui likes to eat and what he doesn't like to eat. She has only met Shu Hui a few times in total. He added, "Hey, don't you remember how much wine he drank when we got married? Isn't that Chinese wine?" He suddenly mentioned their wedding day, and she was very surprised. She couldn't help but think of the scene when Shu Hui was so drunk that day and held her hand at the wedding banquet. When I think about it now, I am not only sad but also a little upset. She always had the impression that he went abroad at that time just to be stimulated for her sake. She didn't say a word at that moment, turned around and laughed. Zhen tidied up the books and went back downstairs. When Cuizhi was nowhere to be seen, he asked the maid, "Where is the young mistress?" The maid said, "I went out to buy wine." Zhen frowned unconsciously. "I thought to myself that there is really no way around a woman's vanity." Of course, he could also understand her intentions. It was simply because Shu Hui was his best friend and he was afraid of neglecting others. In fact, Shu Hui was just like one of his own, so why bother? When I walked to the study, I saw that the floor had been waxed, but the furniture was still piled in a messy corner. Halfway through the cleaning work, the house was in chaos, so she threw it down and ran out. I went there for quite some time and didn't come back. It was already dark, and they had a dinner party at 8 o'clock, which Cuizhi agreed to. Zhen couldn't help but look at the clock many times, and when he saw the maid coming in with the evening newspaper, he said, "Molly, go and arrange the furniture in the study." Molly said, "I'm afraid the arrangement won't be suitable, so I'd better wait until the young mistress comes back." Cuizhi finally returned home with a full load of packages, and was helped by the tricycle driver to bring them in. In addition to the wine, she also bought a set of wine glasses, 2 large handfuls of flowers, an Irish linen tablecloth, 2 cans of Italian coffee, and a new type of coffee pot. Zhen said, "If you don't come back, I'll think you forgot and went to Yuan's house." Cuizhi said, "I almost forgot. I should have called them earlier to get rid of them." Zhen said, "I won't go." "That's good. I owe them a favor again." Cuizhi said, "What time is it? I should have taken a taxi earlier. It's too late now." Then he said, "I forgot to buy 2 cans of better cigarettes. I'll buy them first." I ordered some ham and ran to the tossing court. That's the only one with good quality. I couldn't ask the servant to buy it, so I had to pick it up myself. Zhen said with a smile, "I've been craving ham here for the past 2 days." Chui said. He was stunned for a moment and said in a disbelieving tone, "You like to eat ham? How come I've never heard you say that?" Zhen smiled and said, "Why didn't I say that? Every time I say it, you always say, I had to go to the tossing court, I had to pick it up myself. As a result, I never ate it." Cuizhi fell silent and was busy looking for vases to arrange flowers and put them in the living room, dining room, and study. When he took a look in the study, he shouted, "Hey, why is this room still in such a mess? You don't care about anything anyway. Why don't you ask them to put things in order? Molly, Ma Tao, they're all dead people. The whole family, you just can't leave me holding a vase of flowers with nowhere to put them." He took them back to the living room, looked at the wall, and said, "I didn't even think about opening the box and taking out the 2 ancient paintings to hang them." Zhen said, "You are going to go. Why don't you hurry up and get ready?" Cuizhi said, "You are urging me so hard. Why are you sitting here still?" Zhen said, "I can't wait for 5 minutes." Cuizhi went to dress up, went to the bathroom first, and returned to the bedroom to change clothes. Zhen was looking through the drawers and said, "Where's Molly?" "I can't find any of my shirts," Cuizhi said. "I asked her to go. I went to buy cigarettes." "Don't change your shirt. She washed it out and didn't iron it yet." Zhen said, "Why haven't you ironed any of them?" Cuizhi said, "She must be busy. She is so old." Zhen said, "I don't understand why the people we use are always old and weak, and none of them can do things." Cuizhi said, "It's not that there are no people who can do things. Mrs. Yuan last time, he recommended someone to me who could do it well and be quick. But we didn't treat him to a card game, and there was no extra money, so he refused." "Where did you put the aspirin?" Zhen said, "I didn't see it." Chui said, Zhi went to the stairs and called, Tao Ma. Tao Ma, bring me a bottle of pills. I took them last time when Dabai had a cold. Shijin asked, why do you need aspirin at this time? Have a headache? Zhi said, if you put a piece of flour in the water, the flowers will not wither. Shijin said, are you busy with this at this time? Cuizhi said, it will be too late when we come back. She combed her hair halfway, and Tao Ma found the bottle of pills. She ran downstairs in her slippers and dipped a pill in each vase of flowers. Shijin looked at his watch and said, it's 5 minutes past 8. Why don't you hurry up? Cuizhi said, I'll be fine soon. You asked Tao Ma to call a car. After a while, Shijin called downstairs, said, the car has been called. Are you ready yet? Cuizhi replied from upstairs, don't keep urging me, which will make people panic. Is the key in the cabinet with you? Shijin said, it's not with me. Cuizhi said, I remember you took it. It must be in one of your pockets. Shijin had no choice but to try it out in his pocket. He searched through several pockets inside and outside. Cuizhi poured it over there. I found it again. Without saying a word, I took out 2 pieces of jewelry from the cupboard door and put them on. She finally came downstairs and shouted as she went downstairs, Mama Tao, if someone calls, give him the Yuan family number. You don't know how to ask Molly. Just watch the big baby and the second baby. And wait, Molly is back and tells them to go to bed early. Sitting on the tricycle, she shouted loudly, Ma Tao, don't forget to feed the dog. The 2 of them were sitting side by side on the tricycle. As soon as they had covered the car with the carpet, Cuizhi said to Shijin, hey, please give me a run. There is a pink mirror in the second drawer of the cabinet. You can give it to me. I'll bring it. Not the big one. I want the one with the suede cover. Shijin said, I don't have the key. Without saying a word, Cuizhi took it out of her purse and gave it to him. He didn't say anything, jumped out of the car, walked through the garden, went upstairs, opened the cabinet, found the pink mirror, and handed the key to her. Cuizhi took it and put it in her purse. Fang said, I'm here to urge you. It makes people lose their minds. When they arrived at Yuan's house, all the guests had already arrived. The host Yuan Sihua and the hostess Pingni Yuan came up to shake hands with them. Pingni was the first lady among their acquaintances. She was both talented and beautiful. She was a tall and slender man with thin eyebrows and pink eyes. He has a red, oval face and a very thin voice. I don't know why, but when I speak English, I speak in a higher tone than usual, with a falsetto voice as if I'm singing in an opera. She whispered to Shijin, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you doing lately? Are you busy? Do you like to play Bridget? Shijin said with a smile, it's not a good fight. Pingni smiled and said, you must be polite. But you really need to use your brains to fight Bridget. She chuckled and added, some people just can't fight well. She always thought Shijin was a bit imbecile. He never had anything to say when he met her. Of course he is a good person, but he is just mediocre, has no characteristics at all, and does not have much potential. Not only can he not make money, even the money Cuizhi gave him as a dowry is almost gone for the family. She feels very sorry for Cuizhi, Si Buping. Later, during the conversation, Pingni smiled and said, Cuizhi is so lucky. Shijin has a good temper, he is honest, and he doesn't go out to play. She pursed her lips in that direction and said with a smile, like our Shijin Hua, I don't know how many flowers there are. I also socialize out too much, so there are more temptations. Don't tell me, it's better not to go out often. In her tone, she was very strict with people like Shijin. The husband has a sense of contempt. It was well known that her own husband liked to flirt with women outside. Pingni felt that this was the only thing about her that was inferior to Cuizhi. But she is the strongest person. Even if she is inferior to others in this aspect, she still refuses to admit defeat. There are not many guests today. Just one table. Pingni has a child who also eats at the same table as them. And there is also a nanny for the child. Children must have a nanny. In addition to the nanny, there may also be a nurse who can give injections to the master and mistress. This has become a custom among wealthy families, as if they are not qualified unless they are like this. The nanny of the Yuan family is a part-time caregiver. Everyone calls her Miss Young, but she is probably old and ugly. I don't know where she got her. If it weren't for such a person, he wouldn't be able to survive in their family for long, with the male owner being so lustful. Zhen was sitting next to a Mrs. Li, eating crabs. Mrs. Li solemnly introduced, "This is from Yangqing Lake. They specially asked someone to bring it the day before yesterday." Zhen said with a smile, "Is this from the day before yesterday?" Mrs. Li hurriedly said, They are alive. They are raised in the lake. Buckets of aquatic plants are transported here." Zhen said with a smile, "It's amazing. It's really troublesome. He has seen this Mrs. Li a few times. I really had nothing to say to her. I just remembered that someone said that her husband was the owner of Langshan soap. This soap was advertised everywhere. So he said, I don't even know. Langshan soap belongs to Mr. Li." The wife giggled and said, "He does everything anyway." Then she turned away to talk to others. After dinner, they played bridge. Zhen was dragged into the game, but Cuizhi couldn't play. But it was only after midnight. The two took a tricycle back. Cuizhi said, "What did Mrs. Li tell you when we were eating?" Zhen said blankly, "Mrs. Li, you didn't say anything. You said crabs." Cuizhi said, "No, what did you say? She smiles like that." Zhen said with a smile, "Oh, talk about soap. Langshan soap. Some people say that Lao Li is the boss." Cuizhi said, "No wonder. I think she looks wrong. Langshan soap has a new species. Cao Jing, a dancer whom Lao Li favored, was nicknamed Little Fairy. And now they all call her Zhao Jing." Zhen smiled and said, "Who knows these things about them?" Cuizhi said, "How did you remember it too? They say they make soap." Zhen said, "Why do you always listen to me talking to people?" "You don't have to listen next time," Cuizhi said. "I'm worried because I'm afraid that what you say will offend people." Zhen couldn't help but I thought, in the past, Manson said that I could speak. Of course, her opinion was not necessarily reliable. It was good for me at that time, but living now, why should people worry about me saying the wrong thing? Better I haven't thought of Manson in the past year. This is probably because Shu Hui came back and reminded me of the past. Cuizhi said again, "Pingni has really nice skin." Zhen said, "I don't see what's good about her." Cuizhi said, "I know you don't like her. You don't like women anyway. He hates almost all of her girlfriends. He doesn't seem to be interested in any woman. It can't be said that his love is not exclusive." But Cuizhi always felt that he was nothing more than this to her, so she concluded that he was born with a warm temper. Zhen himself thought so too, but now he thought, maybe he was more enthusiastic than he thought. Otherwise, how could he and Manson be so good at that time? That kind of love can only happen once in a person's life, right? Maybe once in a lifetime is enough. Cuizhi called out Zhen. She had already called out, but he didn't hear her. She became a little scared and said with a smile, "Hey, what's wrong with you? What are you thinking about there?" Zhen said, I was thinking about my whole life there." Cuizhi was angry and funny. "What are you talking about? What happened to you today? Are you angry?" Zhen said, Who is angry?" Cuizhi said, "It would be weird if you weren't angry. Don't be arrogant. You are so angry. What else is there about people that I don't know clearly?" Zhen thought, really, Gotham. Zhen paid the fare there, and Cuizhi went to ring the bell. Lima opened the door with sleepy eyes, yawned again and again, and went to sleep. Cuizhi was about to go upstairs when she suddenly said to Zhen, "Hey, you can smell it. It seems to be the smell of gas." Zhen sniffed the air and said, "No, their family used a briquette stove, but at the same time there is also a gas stove installed." Cuizhi said, "I always worry about Molly. She still doesn't know how to use the gas stove. I'm afraid she didn't turn it off tightly." The two of them went upstairs together. Zhen remained silent. Cuizhi felt that he was very strange today, and she became a little uneasy. Walking on the stairs, she suddenly leaned her head on him and said softly, "Zhen." Zhen hugged her mechanically and suddenly said, "Hey, I heard it now." Cuizhi said, "What do you smell?" Zhen said, "It smells like gas." Cuizhi felt it was very tasteless, paused for a moment, and then said calmly, "Then go and have a look." and take the dog out to let him go. Molly must have forgotten. Just listen to it barking there. Shijin went to the kitchen to take a look and saw that all the buttons on the gas stove were tightened tightly. He thought that maybe there was a leak in the pipe and he would have to call the gas company tomorrow. He opened the front door, took the dog out, left the door ajar, and walked into the dark garden. The grass was chirping with insects and the dew was heavy. The cool breeze blew on my face, which made me sober up even though I was already feeling drunk. The lights were on in their own room upstairs. In the bright window, Cuizhi's shadow can be seen walking round. Sometimes Cuizhi would get angry with him, always say, "I really don't know how he ever thought of getting married." He didn't know either. He only remembered that he was in great pain because of Manzin at that time. That was the year his father died. Also because he was trying to find a way to distract himself. He went to Amy's house to play tennis almost every day that summer. There was a Miss Ding who he often played tennis with. Looking back now, there was a possibility of getting married to Miss Ding at that time. In addition, there were several girls from relatives who met frequently for a period of time, and they may have married any one of them. The fact is that she just missed marrying Cuizhi, which feels ridiculous when I think about it now. The first time they met when they were children was when his brother got married. She pulled the veil and he held the ring. At that time, I felt that the little girl who pulled the gauze was extremely disgusting. She looked down on him because her family looked down on his family. Now I often hear Cuizhi say, "The first time we met was very romantic." She often tells people this. Shijin led the dog in, closed the door, and kept the dog tied up in the kitchen. Seeing that Erbai had dragged the book she had snatched from him downstairs, she picked it up and sent it back to the pavilion. Seeing the books piled up in the pavilion, he couldn't help but sort them out again. He picked up one and dusted it off. It was a new literature series. This book has always been, I don't know where it was stuffed in a corner. If it hadn't been for the room to be occupied by Shu Hui today, I would never have dug it out. He flipped through the pages and suddenly saw a piece of paper sandwiched between the pages of the book. It was double-folded and the paper had turned yellow. It was a letter that Manzin had written to him in the past. He had already destroyed all of Manzin's letters and photos, because leaving them there would only increase his regrets. Only this letter was left, but for some reason at that time, he was not willing to destroy it. And knowingly, he leaned over and sat down, holding the letter and reading it. She wrote to him about when he was returning to Nanjing because his father was ill. The letter said, "Shijin, it's night now. Everyone at home is asleep, and it's extremely quiet. I can only hear the chirping of the crickets my brother and the others bought. The weather has become cold these 2 days. You left in such a hurry this time. You must not have brought any winter clothes with you, right? I think you've always been careless about these things, and you wouldn't think of putting on more clothes when you're cold. I don't know why I keep thinking about these things, and I find them boring. Whatever I see or hear someone say is completely irrelevant. My mind will immediately turn round, and I will immediately think of you. Yesterday I went to Shu Hui's house. I also knew that he would not be at home. I just wanted to see his father and mother, because you have been living with them, and I really hope they will talk about you. Shu Hui's mother said a lot of things about you, which I don't know. She said you used to be thinner than you are now, and also talked about some trivial things about you in school. When I heard her say these words, I really felt comforted, because after you left for a while, I became a little scared, for no reason. Shijin, I want you to know that there is a person in this world who is always waiting for you. No matter when or where you are, you know that there is always such a person. Shijin saw the last few sentences as if she was speaking to him. After all these years, you can still hear her voice. He thought, is she still there waiting for me? There is another paragraph below. The above was written last night, and I wrote so many things unconsciously. It suddenly stopped here, and there was a small half piece of letter paper underneath, with no signature and no month and day. He remembered that this was the time he came back from Nanjing and went to her office to find her. She was writing a letter to him there, so she only wrote half of it and didn't finish it. He suddenly felt that everything in the past seemed to be present one by one, and everything that had happened since they met Manzin came to mind. When did you first meet her? Which year was it? It has been 14 years. It's not 14 years.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.